On a dry night on the road, the wind kicks up dust over an abandoned lot. A dark car appears slowly, pulls up next to a rusty fence, and turns off its headlights. From the trunk, a canine dog, old from police service, is forcibly pulled out with a short chain. Without looking back, the man leaves him tied up and closes the door with a cold click. In the background, only the distant sound of a cricket and the silhouette of two vultures on the post. The car speeds away, disappearing into the dark curve while the chain grates against the iron. The animal, with a fixed gaze, follows the disappearing red light of the car with his eyes. And when everything seems silent, the headlight of a truck appears in the distance, illuminating the scene. Do you like stories with animals? Then subscribe now and don't miss any. Thank you for following us. Now back to our story. The engine of the black sedan cut through the Nevada desert silence like a knife through velvet. Highway 318 stretched endlessly ahead, its asphalt ribbon disappearing into the darkness beyond the headlight beams. In the back seat, a German shepherd named Duke sat perfectly still, his trained posture betraying years of disciplined service. His dark eyes reflected the passing landscape through the tinted windows, but something was different tonight. The usual commands weren't coming. The familiar routine had been broken. Detective Ray Morrison glanced at Duke through the rearview mirror, his weathered hands gripping the steering wheel tighter than necessary. Beside him, Sergeant Collins stared straight ahead, his jaw set in a grim line. Neither man spoke, but the tension in the car was suffocating. Duke had served the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department for 8 years. His keen nose and unwavering loyalty helping solve dozens of cases. Tonight, that same loyalty would become his burden. The car slowed as Morrison spotted the predetermined location. A desolate stretch of road near an abandoned mining claim, miles from the nearest gas station or rest stop. The perfect place for someone to disappear into the vast emptiness of the Mojave Desert. Collins pulled a heavy chain from the trunk, its metallic links catching the moonlight like silver serpents. Duke stepped out obediently when the door opened, his tail wagging slightly, still believing this was part of some elaborate training exercise. Morrison's voice cracked slightly as he gave the command. "Stay, Duke. Good boy." The chain was secured around Duke's neck with practiced efficiency, then fastened to a rusted metal post that had once marked mining property boundaries. The chain was deliberately short, allowing Duke to lie down, but preventing him from reaching the road. Collins avoided eye contact with the dog, his hands shaking as he double-checked the restraints. As the sedan's taillights faded into red dots on the horizon, Duke remained perfectly still, his training telling him to wait for the next command. But no command came, only the whisper of wind through sagebrush and the distant call of a coyote broke the silence. The German shepherd's ears perked at every sound, his body tense with anticipation. Surely his handlers would return. Surely this was temporary. The first night passed slowly. Duke's internal clock, fine-tuned by years of service, told him when shift changes should occur, when feeding time should begin, when patrol duties should start. None of it happened. As dawn broke over the desert mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Duke finally allowed himself to lie down, though his eyes remained alert, scanning the empty highway for familiar vehicles. On the second day, a pickup truck slowed as it passed. The driver, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, pulled over and approached cautiously. Duke's tail wagged hopefully, his trained social instincts kicking in. But as she drew closer and noticed the police department insignia on his collar, her expression changed. She pulled out her phone, taking several photos, but didn't attempt to free him. Instead, she returned to her truck and drove away, leaving Duke more confused than ever. The social media posts began within hours. "Abandoned police dog on Highway 318, read one caption, accompanied by a blurry photo of Duke straining against his chain. The image was shared dozens of times, generating outraged comments and heartbroken emojis. But shares and likes couldn't break chains or provide water. The internet's anger was fierce but brief, quickly moving on to the next viral cause. By the third day, Duke's condition had noticeably deteriorated. His thick coat, once glossy and well-maintained, had become matted with dust and burrs. His tongue lolled from his mouth, a desperate attempt to cool his overheating body. The desert sun was merciless during the day, while nighttime temperatures dropped dramatically, leaving him shivering despite his fur. Yet his training held firm. When vehicles approached, he would sit at attention, hopeful that this time, finally, his handlers had come for him. More motorists stopped throughout the week. Some offered food and water, which Duke accepted gratefully, though many approached with visible hesitation. The police collar was both a blessing and a curse. It identified him as more than a stray, yet it also suggested complications that most people weren't prepared to handle. What if he belonged to an active investigation? What if removing him constituted interference with police business? The questions kept Good Samaritans at arm's length. A family in an RV spent an entire afternoon debating whether to cut Duke's chain. The father, a veteran himself, recognized the intelligence in Duke's eyes and the signs of advanced training in his posture. But the mother worried about legal repercussions, and their teenage daughter couldn't stop crying at the sight of the suffering animal. In the end, they too drove away, promising each other they would call authorities once they reached the next town. The call was never made. Duke's survival instincts, honed by police training, kept him alive even as hope began to fade. He learned to conserve energy during the hottest parts of the day, seeking what little shade the metal post provided. At night, he would scan the horizon for approaching vehicles, his ears rotating like radar dishes at every sound. His nose, still sharp despite his weakened state, catalogued every scent carried on the desert wind. It was during one of these nighttime vigils that Duke first sensed them. Two men in a dark SUV, parked far enough away to avoid detection by casual observers, but close enough to monitor his situation. They didn't approach directly, instead watching through binoculars and speaking in hushed tones. Duke's hackles rose instinctively. These weren't rescuers or curious passers-by. Their body language spoke of patience and purpose, the kind of calculated observation he'd learned to recognize during his police training. The men visited 3 times over the next 2 days, always maintaining their distance, always watching. On their 4th visit, they finally approached, moving with the cautious confidence of people accustomed to dangerous situations. Duke's training kicked in immediately. His posture straightened, his ears pressed forward, and a low growl rumbled in his throat. Something about these men set every alarm bell in his trained mind ringing. The taller of the 2 men produced a small package from his jacket, unwrapping what appeared to be premium steak. The smell should have been irresistible to Duke's empty stomach, but his nose detected something else beneath the meat's aroma. Something chemical and wrong. His training had included scenarios involving poisoned bait, and every instinct screamed danger. Duke backed away as far as his chain allowed, his growl becoming more pronounced. The men exchanged glances, their frustration evident even in the moonlight. The second man knelt down, extending the meat toward Duke while making soothing sounds. But Duke had been trained to resist distractions and temptations during operations. His loyalty to his handlers might have been betrayed, but his training remained intact. He refused the offering, his intelligent eyes never leaving the strangers' faces. After several failed attempts to coax Duke into eating the tainted meat, the men retreated to their vehicle. But they didn't leave. Instead, they positioned themselves where they could maintain visual contact with Duke while remaining hidden from passing traffic. Their vigil had begun in earnest, and Duke sensed that whatever game was being played, he was at the center of it. As the night deepened and the desert temperature dropped, Duke curled up as best he could manage with the restrictive chain. His body ached from days of confinement, but his mind remained sharp. Years of police work had taught him that patience was often the difference between life and something far worse. He would wait, watch, and trust that his training would see him through whatever was coming. The wind carried new scents across the desert, and Duke's ears pricked at the distant sound of a diesel engine. Somewhere out on the highway, an 18-wheeler was making its way through the night. its driver unaware that he was about to become part of a story that would change everything. Marcus Thompson downshifted his Peterbilt as he crested the hill on Highway 318, the familiar rumble of the diesel engine providing comfort in the pre-dawn darkness. 23 years on the road had taught him to read the desert like a book, and something felt off tonight. The veteran trucker had hauled everything from electronics to livestock across this stretch of Nevada countless times. But tonight the landscape seemed to hold its breath. At 54, Marcus carried the weathered look of a man who'd seen too much road and not enough home. His graying beard framed a face mapped with laugh lines and worry creases in equal measure. The Afghanistan veteran had traded one kind of desert for another when he returned stateside, finding solace in the endless miles and solitary cab of his 18-wheeler. The road didn't judge, didn't ask questions about nightmares or flashbacks. It just stretched on, mile after mile, offering the kind of peace that eluded him in crowded places. His logbook indicated he was ahead of schedule, which meant he could afford a rest break. The mandatory hours of service regulations required it anyway, and Marcus had learned long ago that fighting fatigue on desert highways was a losing battle. He'd been driving for 11 hours straight, hauling a load of construction equipment from Phoenix to Reno, when the familiar weight of exhaustion began settling behind his eyes. As his headlights swept across the desolate landscape, searching for a suitable place to pull over, Marcus caught sight of something that made him tap the brake pedal. A reflection of metal, too low to be a guardrail, too isolated to be a road marker. His curiosity piqued. He began looking for a safe place to investigate. Years of military training had ingrained in him the habit of checking out anomalies, even in civilian life. The wide shoulder ahead provided perfect parking for his rig. Marcus set the air brakes and killed the engine, the sudden silence almost overwhelming after hours of mechanical noise. He grabbed his heavy-duty flashlight from the cab and climbed down, his joints protesting the movement. The desert air hit him like a cold slap, carrying scents of sage and dust, along with something else he couldn't quite identify. The metallic clanking sound reached his ears before his flashlight beam found its source. Chain links scraping against metal, rhythmic and persistent. Marcus followed the sound, his boots crunching on gravel and scattered debris from the old mining claim. What he found made him stop dead in his tracks. A German shepherd sat perfectly erect despite his obvious weakened condition, his dark eyes reflecting the flashlight beam with an intelligence that took Marcus by surprise. The dog's police collar was visible even in the dim light, its official markings unmistakable. But it was the chain around the animal's neck that made Marcus's blood run cold. Short, heavy, and secured to a rusted post with professional-grade hardware. "Jesus," Marcus whispered, kneeling slowly to avoid startling the animal. His military experience had included working with military dogs, and he recognized the signs immediately. This wasn't a pet that had wandered off or been accidentally lost. The positioning, the restraints, the location, everything suggested deliberate abandonment. Duke's tail gave the faintest wag as Marcus approached, but his body remained tense, ready to react to any threat. Years of training warred with desperate hope in the animal's posture. Here was another human, but could this one be trusted? The German shepherd's nose worked overtime, cataloging Marcus's scent and finding nothing to trigger alarm. No chemicals, no deception, just the honest smell of diesel fuel, leather, and road dust. "Easy, boy," Marcus said softly, extending his hand for Duke to sniff. "What the hell happened to you out here?" The trucker's voice carried the kind of gentle authority that came from years of handling both men and animals in stressful situations. Duke's nose touched Marcus's fingers briefly, his tail wagging slightly more as he processed this new development. Marcus examined the chain and collar more closely, his flashlight revealing details that made his stomach clench. The collar wasn't just any police accessory. It bore the insignia of the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department and a series of numbers that seemed too deliberate to be mere identification. The chain showed no signs of rust, despite the desert conditions, suggesting it had been placed recently, very recently. The sound of an engine in the distance made Marcus straighten, his hand instinctively moving to the folding knife clipped to his belt. Military habits died hard, and the isolation of this location suddenly felt less peaceful and more ominous. Duke's ears perked at the sound, his body tensing as the distant headlights swept across the landscape before disappearing behind a rise in the road. "You're not the only one watching this place, are you?" Marcus murmured, more to himself than to Duke. The dog's reaction had been too immediate, too knowing. This animal had been monitoring vehicle traffic, expecting someone. But expecting rescue or something else entirely? Marcus spent several minutes examining the restraints, his mechanical knowledge telling him the chain could be cut with proper tools. His truck carried everything he'd need, but something made him hesitate. The professional nature of this setup, the high-quality hardware, the strategic location, none of it suggested a simple case of animal abandonment. Someone had gone to considerable trouble to keep this dog in this specific place. The trucker pulled out his cell phone, unsurprised to find no signal. This stretch of Highway 318 was notorious for dead zones, which had probably factored into whoever had chosen this location. Marcus considered his options while Duke watched him with those impossibly intelligent eyes. He could cut the chain and take the dog with him. But what if this was part of some ongoing police operation? On the other hand, what if it wasn't and he was looking at a case of deliberate cruelty? A water bottle and some beef jerky from his cab seemed like a reasonable compromise. Marcus returned to his truck, moving quickly but quietly, his senses on high alert for any sign of the vehicle he'd heard earlier. Duke accepted the water gratefully, lapping it up with desperate efficiency, while Marcus broke the jerky into small pieces. "Somebody's been watching you, haven't they?" Marcus asked as Duke carefully ate the offered food. The dog's behavior was too controlled, too aware of his surroundings for an animal that had been simply abandoned. This was a working dog maintaining his training even under extreme duress. As Marcus fed Duke, he noticed something else. The dog kept glancing toward a specific direction, his attention drawn repeatedly to a ridge about half a mile away. Following Duke's gaze, Marcus thought he caught a glimpse of light. Not headlights, but something smaller and more focused. Binoculars, perhaps, or a scope. The realization hit Marcus like a physical blow. Duke wasn't just abandoned, he was bait. Someone was using this highly trained police dog as a lure, waiting for exactly this kind of situation. A good Samaritan stops to help, gets involved, and then what? Marcus's military paranoia kicked into overdrive as he began cataloging escape routes and potential threats. Duke seemed to sense the change in Marcus's demeanor, his own alertness increasing. The bond between them, fragile but growing, was based on mutual recognition of danger. Both were veterans of different kinds of service. Both understood the weight of duty and the cost of betrayal. Neither spoke the other's language, but they communicated on a level that transcended words. The distant sound of another engine, this one closer and moving slowly, decided the matter for Marcus. He couldn't leave Duke here regardless of the complications. Whatever game was being played, an innocent animal shouldn't be the playing piece. His bolt cutters would make short work of the chain. But first, he needed to get back to his truck and prepare for whatever might come next. "Stay quiet." "Boy," Marcus whispered to Duke as he backed away toward his rig. "We're going to get you out of here, but we need to do it smart." Duke's eyes followed him, understanding flickering in their depths. This human was different from the others who had stopped and left. This one had the smell of someone who kept promises. As Marcus reached his truck, he heard the distinctive sound of tires on gravel. Someone was approaching on the access road that led to the old mining claim, driving without headlights. The game, whatever it was about to begin in earnest. Marcus grabbed his tools and prepared to make a decision that would change both his life and Duke's forever. The Nevada desert had witnessed many confrontations over the years, but none quite like what was about to unfold on this lonely stretch of highway. Two veterans, one human and one canine, were about to discover that some chains were easier to break than others. The dark SUV crept along the access road like a predator stalking its prey, its engine barely audible above the desert wind. Marcus crouched behind his truck's massive front bumper, bolt cutters in one hand and flashlight in the other, watching as two figures emerged from the vehicle. Even in the dim moonlight, he could see they moved with the practiced coordination of professionals, their body language speaking of extensive training and dangerous intent. Duke's chain rattled softly as he repositioned himself, instinctively placing his body between the approaching men and Marcus's truck. The German Shepherd's training had kicked into full protective mode, his hackles raised and muscles coiled for action despite his weakened condition. Years of police work had taught him to read threatening situations, and every fiber of his being screamed danger. "This is taking too long," Marcus heard one of the men say, his voice carrying clearly in the still desert air. "The boss wants this wrapped up tonight." The second man's response was quieter, but Marcus caught the words "loose ends" and "complications." Whatever these men were here for, it wasn't a rescue mission. The trucker's military instincts fired on all cylinders as he assessed the situation. Two armed men, professional grade, equipment, and a deliberate attempt to harm an innocent animal. The moral equation was simple, even if the tactical situation wasn't. Marcus had two advantages: surprise and terrain knowledge. The men were focused on Duke and hadn't noticed the 18-wheeler parked on the highway shoulder. But those advantages would evaporate the moment he made his move. Once he cut Duke's chain, there would be no going back. Both of them would become targets in whatever dangerous game was being played out here. The taller man produced another package from his jacket, unwrapping what looked like more tainted meat. "One more try," he muttered to his partner. "If this doesn't work, we do it the hard way." Duke backed away from the offered food just as he had before, his intelligence and training overriding his desperate hunger. The rejection seemed to frustrate the men, who began speaking in more urgent tones about timelines and consequences. Marcus caught fragments of their conversation, enough to understand that Duke's continued existence was somehow a problem that needed to be solved permanently. Making his decision, Marcus moved with the silent efficiency his military training had burned into muscle memory. He approached Duke from the side, staying low and using the metal post as cover from the men's line of sight. The bolt cutters bit through the chain with a soft metallic snap that seemed impossibly loud in the quiet desert. Duke's reaction was immediate and telling. Instead of running, he moved closer to Marcus, pressing his body against the trucker's leg in a gesture of trust and partnership. The dog's loyalty had found a new focus, someone who had proven themselves through actions rather than words. "What the hell was that?" one of the men hissed, his head snapping toward the sound. Marcus and Duke were already moving, the trucker's hand resting lightly on the dog's back as they navigated through the shadows toward the highway. But the men were professionals, and the sound of the chain breaking had given away their general direction. Flashlight beams began sweeping the area systematically, growing closer with each pass. "There!" The shout came from behind them as a beam of light caught Duke's reflective collar. "Someone's got the dog." The situation erupted into chaos as the men abandoned all pretense of stealth. Powerful flashlights flooded the area with harsh white light, while urgent voices barked orders and threats. Marcus heard the distinctive sound of weapons being drawn, and his blood ran cold. These weren't just thugs. They were equipped and organized like a military operation. Duke stayed close to Marcus as they reached the truck, his training allowing him to match the human's pace despite his weakened condition. The German shepherd's breathing was labored, but his determination was absolute. Years of serving alongside human partners had prepared him for exactly this kind of situation. "Get in the sleeper," Marcus commanded as he threw open the passenger door. Duke hesitated for only a moment before leaping into the cab with surprising agility. The trucker was already moving around to the driver's side when the first gunshot rang out, the bullet spanking harmlessly off the truck's reinforced bumper. The Peterbilt's diesel engine roared to life with a sound that echoed across the desert like thunder. Marcus had never been so grateful for the massive machine's power as he released the air brakes and pulled onto the highway, his mirrors showing the SUV's headlights swinging toward the road in pursuit. "Hold on, boy," Marcus said to Duke, who had positioned himself in the passenger seat with the alertness of a seasoned patrol veteran. "This is about to get interesting." The 18-wheeler had a head start and superior power, but the SUV was faster and more maneuverable. On the straight stretches of highway, Marcus could maintain his lead, but the winding sections would favor his pursuers. The trucker's mind raced through his options while his hands worked the controls with practiced precision. Duke's collar caught the light from the dashboard, and Marcus noticed something he'd missed before. What he'd initially taken for identification numbers appeared to have some kind of small compartment or attachment. The collar was more than just a piece of equipment. It was a container for something important enough that people were willing to kill for it. "What are you carrying, boy?" Marcus asked, reaching over to examine the collar more closely. Duke allowed the inspection, his trust in this human already complete. The trucker's fingers found a small, concealed mechanism that seemed designed to open under specific circumstances. The SUV was gaining ground on the uphill sections, its headlights growing larger in Marcus's side mirrors. The men inside were professionals, and they knew this terrain well enough to use it to their advantage. The trucker realized he couldn't outrun them indefinitely on these mountain roads. He needed a different strategy. A road sign indicated a truck stop 15 miles ahead, and Marcus began forming a plan. The facility would have security cameras, other drivers, and enough witnesses to make any violent confrontation problematic for his pursuers. If he could reach it, he might be able to get help or at least force the men to back off. But first, he needed to understand what he was dealing with. At the next straight section, Marcus activated his hazard lights and reached for Duke's collar. The mechanism he'd felt earlier yielded to careful pressure, revealing a small, waterproof compartment built into the leather. Inside was a micro SD card, so small it could easily be overlooked, but clearly valuable enough to warrant the elaborate setup he'd stumbled into. Duke watched with interest as Marcus held the tiny card up to the dashboard light. The German shepherd seemed to understand the significance of the moment, his intelligent eyes moving between the card and Marcus's face. This was what all the surveillance, the poisoned meat, and the armed pursuit were about. This tiny piece of technology contained secrets worth committing serious crimes to protect. The SUV's engine note changed as it closed the distance, and Marcus could see in his mirrors that the passenger was leaning out the window with what looked like a rifle. These men had moved beyond intimidation to open violence, confirming that whatever was on the SD card was explosive enough to justify extreme measures. Marcus tucked the card into his shirt pocket and focused on driving, his military training helping him stay calm under pressure. Beside him, Duke maintained the alert posture of a working dog, his senses tracking everything from the engine's performance to the approaching threat. The partnership between them had been forged in minutes, but felt as solid as relationships built over years. The truck stop's lights appeared ahead like a beacon of hope, its parking lot filled with other 18-wheelers and the comforting glow of the main building. Marcus began his approach, but the SUV made its move first, pulling alongside the massive truck with reckless aggression. The passenger window rolled down, and Marcus caught a glimpse of the rifle barrel before he cranked the steering wheel hard right. The Peterbilt's massive bulk forced the SUV off the highway and onto the shoulder in a shower of gravel and dust. Marcus didn't wait to see the results, instead pouring on the power as he raced toward the truck stop and whatever sanctuary it might provide. As they pulled into the parking lot, Duke's tail wagged slightly for the first time since Marcus had found him. The German shepherd seemed to understand that they had reached temporary safety, but his alertness never wavered. Both veterans knew that the real battle was just beginning, and whatever was on that SD card had just made them the most wanted people in Nevada. The Desert Oasis truck stop buzzed with the familiar energy of late-night truckers grabbing coffee, fuel, and brief moments of human connection before returning to the solitary miles ahead. Marcus parked his rig between two other Peterbilts, the massive machines providing cover and camouflage in the sea of similar trucks. Duke remained alert in the passenger seat, his trained eyes scanning the parking lot for threats while his nose processed the countless new scents carried on the desert wind. Marcus killed the engine, but left the key in the ignition, his military paranoia demanding multiple escape routes. Through his mirrors, he watched the access road for signs of the dark SUV, but the immediate pursuit seemed to have been broken. That didn't mean they were safe. It meant their hunters were regrouping and planning their next move. "Come on, boy," Marcus said to Duke, opening the passenger door. "Let's see if we can find some friendly faces in there." Duke jumped down from the cab with careful precision, his weakened condition evident in the slight stiffness of his movements. But his spirit remained unbroken, his tail giving a tentative wag as he took in the bustling truck stop environment. The German Shepherd had spent years around working people, and something about the honest atmosphere of the place seemed to comfort him. Inside the truck stop, the fluorescent lights revealed the full extent of Duke's ordeal. His coat was matted and dusty, his eyes slightly sunken from dehydration, but his bearing remained proud and alert. Several truckers noticed him immediately, their experienced eyes recognizing a working dog even in his current condition. "That's a fine-looking German Shepherd," commented Billy Watson, a grizzled trucker from Oklahoma who was nursing his third cup of coffee. "Looks like he's seen some hard miles lately." Marcus approached the counter where Sarah Martinez, the night shift manager, was restocking the coffee station. At 38, Sarah had worked at the Desert Oasis for 6 years, and she'd seen everything from minor emergencies to major disasters. Her sharp eyes took in Marcus's tense demeanor and Duke's obvious distress with the efficiency of someone accustomed to reading people and situations quickly. "Rough night?" Sarah asked, her voice carrying the kind of professional concern that came from years of dealing with truckers in various states of crisis. "You could say that," Marcus replied, accepting the cup of coffee she offered. "Found this guy chained up on 318, looked like he'd been there for days. Someone was using him as bait for something nasty." Duke positioned himself at Marcus's feet, his body language protective but non-threatening. The German Shepherd's training had taught him to read social situations, and he understood that these people represented safety and potential allies. His tail wagged slightly as Sarah offered him a bowl of water, which he accepted gratefully. "Poor thing," Sarah said, kneeling to examine Duke more closely. Her gentle hands found the police collar, and her expression grew serious. "This is LVMPD. What's a Las Vegas police dog doing chained up in the middle of nowhere?" The question hung in the air like smoke from Billy's cigarette, drawing the attention of other truckers who had been listening to the conversation. Marcus felt the weight of the SD card in his pocket, its tiny presence seeming to burn through the fabric. Whatever information it contained had already put both him and Duke in mortal danger. "That's what I'm trying to figure out," Marcus said carefully. "All I know is someone went to a lot of trouble to keep him in that specific place, and they weren't happy when I interfered." Tommy Rodriguez, a young trucker from California, looked up from his burger. "I saw something on social media yesterday about an abandoned police dog on 318. Lots of people were sharing photos, but nobody seemed to be doing anything about it." The revelation sent a chill through Marcus. If Duke's situation had been on social media, then the people who had abandoned him knew that public attention was growing. That would explain the urgency of tonight's events and the escalation to violence. Time had been running out for a quiet resolution. Duke's ears suddenly perked up, his attention focused on the parking lot windows. Marcus followed his gaze and spotted 2 men in casual clothing examining the trucks systematically. They moved with the purposeful efficiency of professionals conducting a search. their eyes scanning license plates and cab configurations with practiced attention to detail. "We need to go," Marcus said quietly to Sarah, his hand instinctively moving to Duke's collar. "Those men outside aren't here for coffee and diesel." Sarah's expression shifted to immediate concern as she followed Marcus's gaze. Years of managing a truck stop had given her an almost supernatural ability to distinguish between normal customers and people who brought trouble. These men definitely fell into the latter category. "There's a back exit through the kitchen," she said softly. "Leads to the maintenance area behind the building. You can reach your truck through the service road without going through the main lot." Billy Watson stood up from his booth, his weathered face set in grim lines. "Sounds like this young man might need some backup," he said, his Oklahoma drawl carrying the kind of quiet authority that came from decades on the road. Several other truckers nodded in agreement, their expressions making it clear that the truck stop family looked after its own. Marcus felt a surge of gratitude for these strangers who were willing to help without asking too many questions. The trucking community had its own code of honor, and abandoning someone in need wasn't part of it. But he also knew that getting these good people involved could put them in danger. "I appreciate the offer," Marcus said, "but these men are armed and dangerous. I don't want anyone else getting hurt because of my problems." Duke seemed to sense the tension building around them, his body pressing closer to Marcus's leg in a gesture of mutual support. The German shepherd's eyes remained fixed on the parking lot, tracking the searcher's movement with professional intensity. "Kitchen exit it is," Tommy Rodriguez said, standing and stretching. "I was heading out anyway, and my rig happens to be parked near the service road. Might be I'll need to start my engine and warm it up real good. Make a lot of noise while I'm doing it." The plan came together with the kind of natural coordination that emergency situations often produced among strangers. Sarah would create a distraction at the front counter. Billy would occupy the men's attention if they came inside, and Tommy would provide auditory cover for Marcus and Duke's escape. As they prepared to move, Marcus's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. The words made his blood run cold. "We know you have it. Return what doesn't belong to you and no one gets hurt. You have 1 hour," Duke whined softly, sensing the change in Marcus's emotional state. The German shepherd's training had included reading human stress signals, and everything about his new partner was screaming danger. The dog pressed closer, offering what comfort he could while maintaining his vigilant watch on their surroundings. "Change of plans," Marcus said grimly. "We're not just running anymore. Someone thinks I have something they want, and they're willing to escalate this situation to get it back." Sarah's eyes widened as she processed the implications. "What did you find out there?" Marcus's hand moved to his shirt pocket, feeling the tiny SD card that had turned a simple act of kindness into a life-or-death situation. Something important enough to abandon a police dog in the desert and threaten innocent people. Something that's about to make a lot of powerful people very nervous. Through the window, they watched as the two searchers split up, one heading toward the main entrance, while the other began circling toward the back of the building. The net was closing, and Marcus realized that whatever was on that SD card, it was about to force him to make choices he'd never imagined facing when he'd stopped to help a chained dog on a lonely desert highway. Duke looked up at him with those intelligent dark eyes, and Marcus saw something that made his decision for him. Trust, complete, absolute trust that this human would make the right choices, no matter how difficult they might be. The German shepherd had already given his loyalty to someone who had proven worthy of it, and now it was Marcus's turn to prove that trust hadn't been misplaced. The escape from the desert oasis truck stop unfolded with the precision of a military operation, thanks to the spontaneous cooperation of the trucking community. Tommy Rodriguez's diesel engine roared to life with theatrical loudness, just as Marcus and Duke slipped through the kitchen's back door. while Sarah created a distraction by loudly arguing with a confused customer about coffee prices. The cacophony of normal truck stop activity provided perfect cover for their retreat. Marcus's Peterbilt was already running by the time the pursuing men realized their targets had vanished into the night. The service road offered a clean escape route that bypassed the main parking area entirely, and within minutes they were back on Highway 318, heading deeper into the Nevada wilderness. Duke had positioned himself in the passenger seat with the alert posture of a seasoned road warrior, his eyes constantly scanning the mirrors for signs of pursuit. "We need somewhere safe to figure out what we're dealing with," Marcus said to Duke, who responded with a slight tail wag that suggested agreement. The trucker's mind raced through possibilities as the miles rolled by. Truck stops were out, too public and too easy to monitor. Motels would require identification and credit cards, creating electronic trails. What they needed was somewhere off the grid, away from surveillance and prying eyes. The answer came in the form of a weathered sign advertising Jake's Salvage, auto parts and scrap metal, followed by a dirt road that disappeared into the darkness. Marcus had dealt with salvage yards before, and he knew they were often run by independent-minded people who valued privacy as much as their customers did. More importantly, they usually had secure compounds surrounded by high fences and guard dogs. Jake Kowalski emerged from his trailer wearing coveralls and carrying a flashlight, his 70-year-old frame moving with surprising agility. The retired Marine had been running the salvage yard for 30 years, and he'd learned to read people and situations with the accuracy of a polygraph machine. The sight of Marcus and Duke climbing down from the big rig set off every alarm bell in his experienced mind. "Little late for parts shopping," Jake commented, his weathered face revealing nothing of his thoughts. Duke approached cautiously, his police training teaching him to respect authority figures while remaining alert for potential threats. The old Marine's scent carried familiar markers: discipline, integrity, and the subtle signature of someone who'd served his country with honor. "I need help," Marcus said simply, deciding that honesty was his best strategy. "This dog and I stumbled into something dangerous, and we need a safe place to figure out our next move." Jake's eyes moved between Marcus and Duke, taking in details that would escape civilian observation. The trucker's bearing spoke of military service, while the German shepherd's posture screamed professional training. The combination suggested a story worth hearing, especially given the obvious stress both displayed. "Come inside," Jake said after a long moment. "We'll talk." The trailer that served as Jake's office was a museum of automotive history, with parts catalogs dating back decades and photographs of classic cars covering every available wall space. But it was also equipped with modern security equipment, multiple phone lines, and a shortwave radio setup that could reach anywhere in North America. Duke immediately relaxed in the environment, recognizing the orderly efficiency of someone who understood operational security. Marcus laid out the entire story while Jake listened without interruption, occasionally nodding as pieces of the puzzle fell into place. When the trucker produced the micro SD card, the old Marine's expression grew grim with recognition. "Military-grade encryption storage," Jake said, examining the tiny device. "Whatever's on here, someone went to considerable expense to keep it secure. Question is, secure from who?" The answer came when Jake inserted the card into his computer, revealing a directory structure that spoke of months of careful documentation. Video files, audio recordings, financial records, and what appeared to be surveillance photographs filled the screen in neat, chronologically organized folders. The timestamps stretched back almost a year, suggesting a long-term investigation. Duke here was more than just a police dog, Marcus realized as they began examining the files. He was part of an undercover operation. The first video file they opened confirmed Marcus's suspicion in devastating fashion. The footage, clearly shot from a concealed camera in Duke's collar, showed a meeting between several men in what appeared to be a warehouse. The conversation was in hushed tones, but the audio was crystal clear, revealing discussions of money laundering, evidence tampering, and what one participant referred to as cleaning house. Jake's face darkened as they recognized one of the speakers as Detective Ray Morrison, the same man who had abandoned Duke on Highway 318, the realization that a police officer was involved in whatever conspiracy they'd uncovered added new layers of complexity to an already dangerous situation. This dog was collecting evidence against his own handlers, Jake said, his voice heavy with disgust. They used him to get close to criminals, then discovered he was recording everything they were doing wrong. Subsequent files painted a picture of systematic corruption that reached high into the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department. Drug money being diverted, evidence being suppressed, and witness testimonies being altered or disappeared entirely. Duke had been the perfect recording device, trusted, overlooked, and technically sophisticated enough to capture high-quality evidence. The audio files were even more damning, featuring conversations between corrupt officers discussing specific cases and how to manipulate outcomes. Names, dates, dollar amounts, and detailed descriptions of illegal activities filled folder after folder. The scope of the conspiracy was staggering, involving not just individual officers, but entire units within the department. They couldn't just retire him normally, Marcus said, as the full picture became clear. He knew too much, had recorded too much evidence. But they couldn't just make him disappear either, because someone might ask questions. Duke watched the computer screen with what seemed like understanding, his intelligent eyes following the images and his ears perking up at familiar voices. The German shepherd had been living with this knowledge for months, faithful to his training, even as he gathered evidence against the people he'd been taught to trust and obey. So they found a middle ground, Jake continued the thought. Abandon him somewhere remote, let nature take its course, and if anyone asks, they can claim he wandered off during a routine training exercise. The plan had been clever in its simplicity, Marcus realized. A dead dog in the desert wouldn't raise suspicions, especially if the body was never found. The evidence would disappear with Duke, and the corruption could continue unchecked. Only the intervention of a passing trucker had disrupted their timeline and forced them into increasingly desperate measures. The question now, Jake said, ejecting the SD card and handing it back to Marcus, is what you plan to do with this information. Marcus looked down at Duke, who had positioned himself protectively at the trucker's feet. The German shepherd's loyalty had been betrayed by people he'd served faithfully, used as a tool in their criminal enterprises before being discarded like broken equipment. The parallel to Marcus's own military service, where he'd seen good soldiers abandoned by corrupt leadership, was impossible to ignore. We're going to make sure the right people see this, Marcus said, his voice carrying the conviction of someone who'd found his mission. Duke risked everything to gather this evidence. The least I can do is make sure his sacrifice means something. Jake nodded approvingly, his respect for both man and dog evident in his expression. You'll need more than good intentions, the old Marine warned. The people involved in this conspiracy have resources, connections, and a lot to lose. They won't hesitate to eliminate anyone who threatens their operation. As if to emphasize Jake's warning, the salvage yard's perimeter sensors began chirping, indicating movement along the fence line. Through the security monitors, they could see the dark SUV from earlier, along with 2 additional vehicles, slowly circling the property like wolves, testing their prey's defenses. Looks like they found us, Marcus said grimly, his hand moving instinctively to Duke's collar. The German shepherd was already on his feet, his body tense with anticipation and his ears tracking sounds from outside the trailer. Jake Kowalski smiled for the first time since they'd arrived, and Marcus was reminded that not all 70-year-olds were helpless victims. Well then, the old Marine said, reaching for a gun cabinet mounted on the wall, I guess it's time to show these corrupt cops what happens when they threaten honest people on my property. The siege of Jake's salvage was about to begin, and Duke and Marcus had just gained a powerful ally in their fight against a conspiracy that reached to the very heart of law enforcement itself. Jake's salvage transformed from a quiet scrapyard into a fortress within minutes of the perimeter alarm sounding. The old Marine moved with the efficiency of someone who'd planned for exactly this type of situation, activating floodlights that turned the compound into a brilliantly illuminated stage and engaging security systems that would record everything happening within the fence line. 30 years in this business teaches you that not everyone who comes looking for parts has honest intentions. Jake explained as he handed Marcus a powerful spotlight. I've dealt with thieves, smugglers, and people running from the law, but I've never had corrupt cops show up at my door. Duke positioned himself at the trailer's main window, his trained senses cataloging every movement in the compound. The German shepherd's body language had shifted into full protection mode, his years of police training seamlessly adapting to this new environment and mission. The dog understood that the evidence in Marcus's pocket represented hope for justice, and he was prepared to defend it with everything he had. Through the security monitors, they watched as men emerged from the 3 vehicles now surrounding Jake's property. The corrupt officers moved with tactical precision, but their body language revealed frustration and increasing desperation. Time was working against them, and every hour that passed increased the risk of their conspiracy being exposed. They're trying to decide whether to come over the fence or attempt negotiation, Jake observed, his experienced eyes reading the tactical situation with professional accuracy. My guess is they'll try to talk first, see if they can convince us to hand over what they want without a fight. The prediction proved accurate when Jake's telephone rang, the number showing as a blocked call. He activated the speakerphone, allowing Marcus and Duke to hear both sides of the conversation that was about to unfold. Mr. Kowalski, this is Detective Morrison with the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police, came the voice they'd heard on the SD card recordings. We're investigating the theft of a police K9 unit and evidence related to an ongoing operation. We have reason to believe the suspects are on your property. Jake's response was measured and professional. Detective, I have security cameras recording everything happening on my property right now. If you're conducting official police business, I'll need to see proper warrants and identification before I can assist you. The silence that followed stretched uncomfortably long, clearly indicating that Detective Morrison and his associates hadn't anticipated dealing with someone who understood legal procedures. When the response came, the frustrated edge in Morrison's voice was unmistakable. So this is a matter of national security involving sensitive police operations. We don't have time for bureaucratic procedures. We need your cooperation, and we need it now. National security, Jake repeated, his tone suggesting deep skepticism. Detective, in my 30 years running this business, I've learned that people who claim urgent national security concerns while refusing to show proper documentation are usually the ones you need to worry about most. Marcus felt a surge of admiration for the old Marine's steady nerves under pressure. Jake was forcing the corrupt officers to reveal their true nature while creating an audio record of their illegal demands. Every word of the conversation was being preserved by the salvage yard's security system. Duke, suddenly alert at the window, a low growl rumbling in his throat as he tracked movement along the eastern fence line. Someone was attempting to approach the compound from an unexpected direction, probably hoping to catch them off guard while attention was focused on the main gate. We've got movement on the east side, Marcus reported, following Duke's gaze to spot figures cutting through the chain-link fence. They're not waiting for cooperation. Jake ended the phone call with Morrison and activated additional security measures, including motion-activated cameras that would document any illegal entry onto his property. Let them come, he said grimly. Every step they take is being recorded and transmitted to off-site servers. If something happens to us, there will be undeniable evidence of who was responsible. The breakthrough came when Jake's computer chimed with an incoming secure message from an encrypted email account. The sender identified himself as Agent David Chen with the FBI's Internal Corruption Task Force, and his message sent shockwaves through all three defenders. Mr. Kowalski, we've been monitoring communications related to corruption in the LVMPD. Our surveillance indicates you may have evidence related to an ongoing federal investigation. Can you confirm you have Detective Morrison's K9 unit and associated materials? Marcus and Jake exchanged glances of amazement and hope. The federal authorities were already aware of the corruption and actively investigating it. Duke's evidence hadn't been the beginning of the case. It had been the missing piece they needed to complete their investigation. Affirmative, Jake typed in response. We have the dog, the handler, and digital evidence, currently under siege by subjects of your investigation. Agent Chen's response was immediate and reassuring. Federal units en route to your location. Estimated arrival 12 minutes. Maintain defensive positions and preserve all evidence. Do not engage subjects unless directly threatened. The knowledge that legitimate help was coming transformed the entire dynamic of the situation. Jake continued monitoring the corrupt officers through his security system, while Marcus worked on copying the SD card's contents to Jake's secure server. Duke maintained his vigil at the window, his training keeping him alert despite the improved circumstances. They're getting nervous out there, Jake observed, watching as Morrison and his men huddled near their vehicles in what appeared to be an urgent strategy session. They know time is running out, and they're probably trying to decide whether to retreat or make a desperate play. The decision came when Morrison's team attempted a coordinated approach from multiple directions, clearly intending to overwhelm the compound's defenses through sheer aggression. But Jake's security system lit up the entire area like a football stadium, while recorded warnings broadcast from hidden speakers informed the intruders that federal authorities were en route and all activities were being recorded. The psychological effect was immediate and dramatic. Men accustomed to operating in shadows suddenly found themselves exposed under brilliant lights, their illegal actions being documented by professional-grade surveillance equipment. The advantage had shifted completely, and they knew it. Duke's tail began wagging for the first time in hours as the distant sound of sirens reached his sensitive ears. The German Shepherd's training had taught him to recognize the approach of legitimate law enforcement. And everything about the arriving vehicles spoke of proper authority rather than corrupt intimidation. Agent Chen arrived with a convoy of FBI vehicles and U.S. Marshals, their presence immediately changing the entire atmosphere of the confrontation. Morrison and his associates found themselves surrounded by federal agents with proper warrants and the authority to make arrests that would stick in court. You gentlemen are under arrest for conspiracy, corruption, obstruction of justice, and about 15 other federal crimes, Agent Chen announced as the corrupt officers were taken into custody. You have the right to remain silent, and I strongly suggest you use it. Marcus watched the arrests with profound satisfaction, while Duke pressed against his leg in a gesture of shared triumph. The German Shepherd had endured abandonment, starvation, and deliberate cruelty to preserve evidence that would bring justice to those who had betrayed their oaths. His loyalty and courage had been vindicated in the most complete way possible. The evidence you preserved is going to put a lot of bad people in federal prison for a very long time, Agent Chen told Marcus and Jake as the scene was processed by federal investigators. Duke here is going to be the star witness in one of the biggest corruption cases we've ever prosecuted. As dawn broke over the Nevada desert, Marcus realized that what had started as a simple act of kindness toward an abandoned animal had become something much larger. Duke had taught him that loyalty and courage could overcome betrayal and corruption, that doing the right thing was always worth the risk. no matter how dangerous the circumstances. 6 months later, Marcus Thompson stood in a federal courthouse in Las Vegas, watching as Duke received a commendation from the FBI director for exceptional service in the fight against corruption. The German Shepherd wore a special collar bearing federal law enforcement insignia, a far cry from the heavy chain that had nearly ended his life in the Nevada desert. His coat had regained its lustrous shine, and his eyes sparkled with the intelligence and dignity that had never truly been dimmed. Even in his darkest moments, the corruption trial had dominated headlines for weeks, with Duke's evidence proving instrumental in securing convictions for Detective Ray Morrison and 12 other officers involved in the conspiracy. The scope of their crimes had shocked even seasoned federal prosecutors, involving millions in stolen drug money, dozens of tampered cases, and a pattern of abuse that had corrupted an entire unit within the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department. Marcus had testified as a key witness, his account of finding Duke and discovering the evidence providing crucial context for the jury. The trucker's simple act of compassion had unraveled a criminal enterprise that had operated with impunity for years, proving that sometimes the most powerful force for justice came from the most unexpected sources. "I never thought stopping to help a dog would change my entire life," Marcus reflected as he and Duke walked through the courthouse corridors after the ceremony. The German Shepherd stayed close to his side, their bond having deepened into something that transcended the typical human-animal relationship. They had become partners in the truest sense, united by shared experience and mutual respect. The media attention had been intense, but ultimately positive. Duke's story had captured the public imagination, inspiring countless articles about police dog welfare and the importance of protecting whistleblowers, even when they had 4 legs and couldn't speak for themselves. Marcus had found himself reluctantly famous, dubbed the highway hero by newspapers across the country. But fame wasn't what motivated either of them. Marcus had used his newfound platform to advocate for better protection of working dogs and more robust oversight of police K9 programs. Duke, meanwhile, had found new purpose as a therapy dog, visiting veterans' hospitals and helping other service members deal with trauma and betrayal. Agent David Chen approached them as they prepared to leave the courthouse, his expression mixing professional satisfaction with personal warmth. "The director wanted me to thank you both personally," he said, kneeling to scratch Duke behind the ears. "This case has led to investigations in 4 other states. Duke's evidence was just the beginning." Marcus nodded, understanding the broader implications of their adventure. "Any word on Duke's official status?" "The paperwork seemed pretty complicated. Actually, that's why I wanted to catch you before you left," Chen smiled. "The federal government has officially transferred Duke's registration to you. He's retired from active duty with full honors, and you're now his legal guardian. There's also a pension that comes with his service record." Duke's tail wagged enthusiastically, as if he understood every word being discussed. The German Shepherd had known for months that Marcus was his new pack leader, but the official recognition seemed to please him enormously. His loyalty had found its proper home at last. The transition to civilian life had been surprisingly smooth for both of them. Marcus had modified his truck to accommodate Duke's needs, installing a custom sleeping area and specialized equipment for long-haul journeys. The German Shepherd had adapted to life on the road with the enthusiasm of a natural traveler, his presence providing companionship during the lonely miles, while his training proved invaluable in assessing potentially dangerous situations. Their first major journey together had taken them from Nevada to Maine, delivering construction equipment while making stops at veterans organizations along the way. Duke's story had opened doors and hearts wherever they went, his example inspiring other veterans to find meaning in service to their communities. Jake Kowalski had become a regular part of their extended family, his salvage yard serving as a home base between runs. The old Marine had been deeply affected by Duke's courage and Marcus's integrity, and He'd begun working with federal authorities to improve security for other whistleblowers who might need protection. "You know what the best part of all this is?" Marcus asked Duke as they climbed into their truck outside the courthouse. The German shepherd's ears perked with interest, his head tilting in the characteristic gesture that Marcus had come to associate with deep attention. "We proved that doing the right thing still matters, even when it's dangerous and difficult. You never gave up hope, even when the people you trusted most had abandoned you. That kind of loyalty and courage can change the world." Duke's response was a gentle nudge against Marcus's hand, followed by the kind of contented sigh that spoke of perfect understanding between partners. The road ahead stretched endlessly before them, full of possibilities and adventures waiting to unfold. Their next destination was a children's hospital in Denver, where Duke would spend a week working with young patients who needed to learn that trust was still possible, even after betrayal and trauma. The German shepherd's gentle nature and inspiring story had made him extraordinarily effective at helping others heal from their own difficult experiences. As they pulled onto Interstate 15, Marcus reflected on the profound changes that had transformed both their lives. A chance encounter on a dark highway had evolved into a partnership that exemplified the very best of human and canine nature. Duke had taught him that loyalty was a choice that had to be made every day, while Marcus had shown Duke that not all humans would betray the trust placed in them. The truck stop radio crackled with conversations from other drivers, their voices carrying across the airways like a community of modern nomads sharing stories and information. Marcus keyed his microphone and shared an update on their location and destination, part of the informal network that kept long-haul truckers connected across vast distances. Duke settled into his custom bed, his eyes already growing heavy with the rhythm of the road. But even as sleep claimed him, one ear remained alert, his protective instincts never fully at rest. The German shepherd had learned that vigilance was the price of security, but he'd also learned that some partnerships were worth protecting at any cost. As the Nevada landscape gave way to Utah's dramatic red rock formations, Marcus felt a profound sense of gratitude for the twist of fate that had brought them together. He'd started that night as a lonely trucker looking for a place to rest, and ended up as part of something much larger than himself. The miles rolled by beneath their wheels, each one carrying them toward new adventures and opportunities to make a positive difference in the world. Duke and Marcus had found their calling on a dark desert highway, and they were determined to honor it with every mile they traveled together. Their story had become legend among truckers and law enforcement officers alike, proof that heroism could emerge from the most unexpected circumstances. But for Marcus and Duke, the real victory wasn't in the headlines or commendations. It was in the unbreakable bond they'd forged and the knowledge that they'd found their true purpose in service to others. The highway stretched ahead like a promise of infinite possibilities, and they were ready for whatever adventures awaited them on the road they now traveled as partners, friends, and family. Dear listeners, we hope Marcus and Duke's incredible journey has touched your hearts and reminded you that heroism can emerge from the simplest acts of kindness. Their story shows us that loyalty, courage, and doing what's right can overcome even the most challenging circumstances. If this tale of an unlikely partnership between a trucker and a retired police dog has moved you, we'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where helping a stranger changed your life? Share your own stories of unexpected friendships and acts of courage. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories that celebrate the extraordinary bonds between humans and animals. Hit that notification bell so you never miss our latest adventures, and remember, sometimes the most meaningful journeys begin with a single act of compassion on a lonely highway.